whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I did not have sexual relations.
On an absolutely perfect phone call.
Good evening. Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Lecciadello.
This week, Joe Biden unopposed as Bernie drops out. I'll talk to the former senator that Biden calls his best friend.
And I'll separate the fact from fiction about COVID-19. But first...
The week began with a report from the New York Times dissecting the Trump administration's early response to the spread of coronavirus. It detailed warnings President Trump received and in some cases dismissed from health experts, including Health Secretary Alex Azar, who informed him of the possibility of a pandemic in January, only to be told by the president he was being alarmist. Trade advisor Peter Navarro also warned the president in late January of potentially 500,000 deaths and trillions of dollars in economic losses. The Times report characterised a halting, disjointed response, including 3 weeks in February and early March, where the White House resisted their own experts' calls for social distancing as the virus spread unabated. America's top infectious diseases expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, was asked whether the president holding off recommending social distancing until mid-March cost lives. He said it's not that simple, but he didn't deny it either.
Obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. But you're right. I mean, obviously, if we had, right from the very beginning, shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
Well, Trump supporters, including former congressional candidate Deanna Lorraine, criticised Fauci using the hashtag #FireFauci. That wasn't really surprising. She's a bit of a nobody, but she was no longer a nobody once the president retweeted her, and that led to a day of speculation the president was about to sack Fauci.
An update from the White House Monday afternoon saying that Trump is not firing Dr. Fauci. They go on to describe Fauci as a trusted advisor to the U.S. president and dismissing what they call all this media chatter as ridiculous.
Silly old media, Chaz.
I gotta say, actually, I'm with Trump on this one. Let's see that tweet again. Except Trump didn't just retweet that, he quote tweeted it. So Lorraine tweeted, Fauci's now saying that had Trump listened to the medical experts earlier, he could have saved more lives, but Fauci was telling people on February 29 that there was nothing to worry about and it posed no threat. And then Trump responded, it's all on tape. I banned China long before people spoke up. Now, while I can't read Trump's mind, he seems to have been responding to that bit, whereas the media have been focusing on that bit. By the way, I should say that tweet kind of misrepresents Fauci's message from February.
A little bit?
Yeah, just a little bit. You tell me if Fauci's saying there's nothing to worry about and COVID poses no threat.
You've got to watch out because although the risk is low now, you don't need to change anything you're doing. When you start to see community spread, this could change and force you to become much more attentive to doing things that would protect you from spread.
See, that looks to me like Fauci was saying that the threat wasn't immediate, but it could come at any time. One more thing. Sacking Fauci would be nuts. 78% of the public approves of how Fauci's handling the crisis, and that includes 77% of Republicans. So that would be a real big call, John.
Yeah, but if he does it, that's probably exactly why he'd do it as well. Yesterday, Dr. Fauci was treading a pretty fine line. He defended the president, saying whenever he'd made direct recommendations, they had been acted upon, but he was also a bit fuzzy on a few dates and details.
To be honest with you, I don't even remember what the date was, but I can just tell you the first and only time that I went in and said we should do mitigation strongly, the response was, yes, we'll do it.
Meanwhile, the president says that while he wasn't trying to fire Fauci, he did see that hashtag.
Today I walk in, I hear I'm going to fire him. I'm not firing him. I think he's a wonderful guy.
You tweet something that said fire Fauci. Why did you
fire Fauci?
I retweeted somebody. I don't know. They said fire. Doesn't matter.
Did you notice that when you retweeted it?
Yeah, I notice everything.
And so, as we've seen countless times during the Trump presidency, he has changed the media narrative with a single tweet. The president also turned the media's attacks back on the media, accusing them of downplaying the threat of coronavirus while he acted, and he had a video to prove it.
People should be more concerned right now with the flu in this country.
A lot of people are concerned about the coronavirus because they're hearing a lot of news about it right now. But the reality is, comparing it to the flu, for example, it's not even close to being at that stage.
Of course, there were all TV doctors in late January saying it wasn't yet a major threat, while actual White House experts were telling Trump it soon would be, Chaz.
Look, to be fair, back in January there were heaps of people comparing COVID to the flu. But not too many by March the 10th, though, John, when Trump still tweeted, last year 37,000 Americans died from the common flu. At this moment, there are 546 confirmed cases of coronavirus with 22 deaths. Think about that. Well, that tweet didn't quite make Trump's video, John. Back to today. And it's starting to look like America may have hit their COVID peak, with new daily cases either steady or dropping for 11 days now. New COVID cases are now in the mid-20,000s rather than the mid-30,000s. By contrast, new deaths have been up and down a bit. Remember though, deaths is a trailing indicator, so you still get nasty surprises like today's record of 2,400 new deaths. Nevertheless, projected deaths until August have been downgraded by the White House's favourite modelers from over 90,000 deaths early last week down to 82,000 and then down to 60,000 deaths, all in 1 week.
The big question now, though, is with signs the pandemic may have peaked in some regions of America, when will it be okay to start the process of reopening? Well, according to Dr. Fauci, it's going to happen in stages and it will look different in various parts of the country.
It is not going to be a light switch that we say, okay, it is now June, July, or whatever, click, the light switch goes back on.
And of course, testing is also a key factor. For instance, last week we spoke about how black people seem to get disproportionately sick from COVID. Well, thanks to testing, scientists have now found that 1 extra microgram per cubic metre of air pollution is associated with a 15% increase in the COVID death rate. And of course, more black people live in the more polluted parts of America's cities. So that is useful information. The real gold standard for beating this thing, though, is what they call contact tracing. That's when someone tests positive and all the people they've had contact with are told to also get tested. Google and Apple have announced a joint effort to use Bluetooth technology in our phones to gather and store all that contact information, so Americans might start receiving those messages as soon as next month. Of course, what happens to those capabilities after the virus is over is anyone's guess. Sounds a little bit like the beginning of a Terminator movie to me. One more thing. A few weeks back, we spoke about how Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer was struggling to get medical supplies. Well, we've learned a little bit more about that. It seems states have been arranging to buy supplies and then FEMA has been claiming them instead.
Congressional sources telling CNN that many of the orders that your state placed, including the one for 500 ventilators, have been canceled because FEMA is snatching them up, and you have to compete with the federal government to get what you need.
Well, either be in or out, folks. That's kind of my message. Either you're buying them and you're providing them to the states and you're letting us know what we're going to get and when we're going to get them, or stay out and let us buy them.
And then Trump magnanimously gives those states back a fraction of what they had previously tried to buy for themselves.
We'll be immediately sending 100 ventilators to Colorado at the request of Senator Gardner.
Where do the rest of the supplies go? They give a big hunk of it to private contractors to sell back to the states, who then have to bid against each other.
What the White House has done is created, they call this the air bridge, where they're bringing stuff back from China to the United States, and then they're delivering it to private companies in the United States, not to the states. And they're letting all of us bid against each other for those goods that are owned by the private companies.
Wouldn't describe that as the height of efficiency, John.
Not so much. Meanwhile, after weeks of threatening to withhold funding to the World Health Organization, President Trump has come good on that promise today, accusing the WHO of, quote, severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of coronavirus. The big election news this week was Joe Biden sealing the Democratic presidential nomination after Bernie Sanders called it quits.
Bernie Sanders dropped out today, telling supporters victory was, quote, virtually impossible.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth.
The truth is, Bernie was almost 30 points behind Biden in the average of polls, and he was trailing Biden by 350 delegates with little hope of making up the difference. All of that while a pandemic stopped the campaign in its tracks, and voting itself was dangerous. Yesterday, Biden was declared the winner of last week's controversial Wisconsin primary, which went ahead despite fears for the health of voters and election workers. Biden winning round about twice the number of votes as Bernie Sanders did. On Monday, Bernie moved to try to unify the Democratic Party, joining a Biden live stream to make a major announcement.
So today I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse.
Somebody must have said, Joe, try and act surprised when he says it. Sanders did press Biden to support a range of his economic proposals, including an increase in the federal minimum wage. All in all, it was really very chummy. Raising Democratic hopes there will not be the same lingering bitterness that followed the 2016 primary between Sanders and Hillary Clinton.
Thank you for being such a gentleman. Thank you for being so generous. And I give you my word, I'll try my best not to let you all down.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks, pal.
Say hello to Jane and I say hello to Jill as well.
I will.
Love to the family. And earlier today, former President Barack Obama also endorsed Joe Biden after staying neutral throughout the primaries. But as Bernie has formally bowed out, that means it's time to dust off the old board game.
Guess who won't be president?
And there he goes. Probably the most influential presidential candidate never to win the nomination, much less the White House. It was an extraordinary 5-year campaign from Bernie, a previously obscure, curmudgeonly 70-something independent senator and Democratic socialist, one that helped to reorientate American politics, putting Medicare for all front and centre of the political debate. Along the way, he inspired millions of supporters and at least one little bird.
Healthcare is a right of all people, not a privilege. That the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
I don't tolerate bullshit terribly well.
Now it is time to complete that revolution and implement the vision that we fought for. The American people are sick and tired of a president who lies all of the time.
And there's way too much for me to say about this topic, so I'll save it for tonight's podcast, which you can find there after the show.
Now, our guest this week is a former US Senator, Chris Dodd. He served alongside Joe Biden for more than a quarter of a century in Congress. Biden and Dodd both ran for president in 2008, and the two were on Barack Obama's vice presidential shortlist before, obviously, Joe Biden was given the job. Now he's secured the Democratic presidential nomination, Biden's first important decision is going to be picking his own running mate. So I asked Chris Dodd, what should Biden be looking for in a VP?
First and foremost, you want someone who could do the job. Lord forgive that something would happen to the president. You want to make sure that individual, in your mind, was thoroughly competent and capable to assume that responsibility. So that will be a major criteria. And again, and Joe's honest enough to look in the mirror and recognize he's not the youngest candidate to ever run for the office. And so having someone that could do that heightens that subject matter and interest. Not that he has any intention of being a one-term president. I think if his health is good, he'll want to run for re-election. But in the meantime, you want someone to do that. I think someone as well who can come in and give Joe a sense of comfort as well. The vice president, in my view, needs to go to bed at night and get up in the morning with one thought in mind. How do I make this administration successful with the American people? You can have your debates inside those rooms, argue about the best approach. But when the debate is open and the door opens, the president needs to know that vice president that he has chosen to be with him is going to be full-throated and endorsing the policies that the president has laid out and put forward. Those are the two major ones. I know well enough, Joe Biden, that he'd want a person next to him that he can have that confidence with in those moments that come along, as they inevitably do in a president's term of office. So a strong person, a person competent that could do the job, and a person who will understand they're the number two, much as Joe Biden was. Joe Biden not only was the number two for Barack Obama, he acted like the number two for Barack Obama. He was that person who supported the president, supported his decisions, even when I'm sure there were differences.
You've known Joe Biden a very long time. Reportedly, some who are close to him, including President Obama, were worried about him running in this election, that he might get beaten up pretty badly, if not in the primaries, then by President Trump. As a friend, did you have any doubts about whether this was the right thing for Joe Biden to be doing?
Not at all. Not at all. I didn't encourage him 4 years ago. I think it was too late for him to be making that decision to get involved in the campaign. I know he would have liked to have done it. In my view, had he really wanted to run in that time, he would have had to announce almost the night that Obama left office that he was going to be considered a candidate in 4 years. He decided not to do it, and of course had huge personal issues affecting his family. With the loss of his son, Beau, it was tragic for him. Obviously, it still affects him in some ways. But I think he made the right decision then, and I think he's made the right decision here. More than a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when he and I chatted and he asked me what I thought he should do, I said, I think you ought to run. I think this is your time. I think you're exactly what the country will be looking for. I had no idea we'd be facing what we are presently. But again, if I had known that, I would have even said it. I would have doubled down on it, John, because I think the country's looking for an empathetic leader, one that will understand what people are going through. You can't create that, no matter how hard you try. For a man who's had to bury 2 children and a wife, who's been through the tragedies that other families go through, they want to know someone who's sitting across from them on that TV screen in that Oval Office has some idea of what it likes to go through a hard time. And Joe Biden knows what that's like. And that's going to be critically important in this stage of our history.
Given that his sole surviving son, Hunter, has already been dragged into the election process and is likely to continue to be a target, do you think he's tough enough to take that, or does that really hurt when those personal and family attacks come?
It does. And wasn't it miraculous that when Joe Biden was doing very poorly in New Hampshire and Iowa, the appetite for going after Hunter Biden sort of disappeared from the president's rallies that he held and so forth. This is a phony story. The media here, at a time when people are highly critical of the media, have done a stellar job of exposing what it was. And so obviously there's nothing to the story. The president, I'm sure, will bring it up because he's not reluctant to bring up anything, no matter how true it is, along the way. So, but Joe has known that from the very beginning of this campaign, and he will prove over and over again how tough this guy from Scranton, Pennsylvania is.
Hello and welcome back to everybody's favorite game show, Just Get 1 Point, where all you have to do is get one answer correct. Our guest tonight is, again, Donald Trump. Donald, for those tuning in, maybe tell the audience a little about yourself.
I'm not an accountant from China.
Well, it's terrific to see you again.
I have no idea who you are, but that's okay.
Terrific stuff. Well, a reminder of what you're playing for tonight, Donald. It's a Gardening Australia box set, courtesy of the ABC.
Plus cash?
We discussed this.
Plus cash?
Nope.
Plane loads of cash?
Fine, whatever. For 1 point, directed in 1941 by Orson Welles, what is largely considered to be the greatest film of all time?
Under Siege.
Not even close. Next, who is the captain of the Manchester United Football Club?
Well, he's a good athlete and he loves soccer.
Is that your whole answer? Then, no, you don't get a point.
The sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden have hit the mainstream media, with extensive reports in a few newspapers this week. The New York Times said they found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Joe Biden beyond the hugs, kisses and touching that women previously said made them uncomfortable. And then when the Times was widely mocked for not realising there is a pattern of sexual misconduct, they just disappeared that bit. There. All better. The Times also interviewed a lot of people, including not just a friend that Tara Reid told her story to in 1993, but also a friend she told parts of it to in 2008. The Times said that no former Biden staff members corroborated any details of her allegations, but that's not really true, because she said that straight after she filed a sexual harassment complaint against Biden, his staff took away most of her duties, including supervising the interns. And the Times' own reporting found that the interns said she had abruptly stopped supervising them before the end of their internship. On the other hand, Reid's critics have done their own digging, and they found these. Reid liking a tweet 3 years ago where Joe Biden reminds men just how important they are in the fight against sexual assault, and Reid retweeting compliments about Biden's work to end sexual assault. The Washington Post asked Reid about her pro-Biden tweeting, and she said that she tweeted support of him because she admired some things about Biden despite the alleged assault. Here's the person I admire, who stands for all I believe in, she said. At the same time, that's what happened to me personally. For their part, Biden's campaign has strenuously denied the allegations, but Reid this week filed a criminal complaint about the matter. So, John, this is not going away.
Could be with us for a while. The US presidential election is on Tuesday, the 3rd of November, 202 days from now, with the possibility that sections of the community will still be in lockdown or at least wary of going to crowded polling places. Mail-in ballots may seem to be an obvious solution, but the president is not keen, even though he is a postal voter himself, because, he says, of possible voter fraud.
Mail-in voting, mail-in ballots for voting.
I think mail-in voting is
but
horrible.
You voted by
It's
mail
corrupt.
in Florida's election last month, didn't you?
Sure, I could vote by mail for that.
How do you reconcile
Because I'm
that?
allowed to.
In fact, President Trump has been making allegations of voter fraud for a long time. He warned of it before the 2016 election.
Now, do you think those ballots are properly counted? Do you think? So when you send them in, do you think they're properly counted?
And even after winning the presidency, he claimed voter fraud was the reason he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton.
You have people that are registered who are dead, who are illegals, who are in 2 states. You have people registered in 2 states. They're registered in New York and in New Jersey. They vote twice.
He's right about one thing. Lots of Americans are registered to vote in more than one place, like
his son-in-law and White House senior advisor, Jared Kushner, registered in New York and New Jersey. His daughter, Tiffany, registered in New York and Pennsylvania.
But that is not illegal as long as you only vote once. Still, President Trump set up a voter fraud commission to investigate.
We have to understand where the problem exists, how deep it goes, and then suggest some remedies to it.
The commission got straight to work asking states for all sorts of information about voters.
45 states plus Washington, D.C. have refused to provide some or all of the information, citing their own state laws or privacy concerns.
Many feared, though, that Trump's voter fraud commission was really a voter suppression commission, and the whole thing fell in a heap.
Less than 8 months after he created it, President Trump has disbanded his voter fraud commission.
Still, President Trump claims there is a lot of evidence of things like
thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win.
And he's right. Some weird things have happened with people bundling up votes, but not actually by mail, in person.
Residents have said activists went door to door seeking unsigned or unsealed absentee ballots.
Something fishy was certainly going on in North Carolina in 2018.
Why, for instance, did a lopsided share of absentee ballots that were counted favor Mr. Harris, while an overwhelming amount of ballots requested but never returned or counted came from areas likely to favor McCready?
So people were out collecting absentee votes, lodging ones for Harris and losing the votes for the other guy, McCready. That's almost exactly a little bit similar to what Trump's been warning about all along.
They have to be very careful, because you know the things with bundling and all of the things that are happening with votes by mail, where thousands of votes are gathered. And I'm not going to say which party does it.
But maybe the reason the president won't say is because it was his Republican Party. Still, the president says there has been a lot of voter fraud in California too.
They agreed that 1 million people should not have voted, where they were 115 years old and lots of things, and people were voting in their place.
And while the state of California did purge about 1.5 million names of people who had moved or died from their voter registration rolls, that lawsuit made no mention of voter fraud or any illegal voting. No 115-year-old dead people voted. Fact checkers gave Trump's claim a liar, liar, pants on fire rating. It is just not true. So, how much voter fraud is really going on? During the presidency of George W. Bush, the Justice Department went hunting for voter fraud, and they found out of 197,056,035 votes, there were just 26 convictions or guilty pleas. The Conservative Heritage Foundation has been tracking voter fraud and has come up with 1,277 proven cases of voter fraud in all elections dating back to 1982. So, if there is no widespread fraud, why would President Trump want to stop a mail-in election? As he explained when Democrats wanted to include mail-in voting in the recent bailout bill.
The things they had in there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
And there it is. The harder it is to vote, the fewer people will vote. And those that do tend to be older, white voters.
If you're a senior citizen and if you're somebody that needs it, I'm all for it.
And guess who? Older white voters are more likely to vote for.
Let's move on to your specialty round, which is South Korea.
I know South Korea better than anybody.
Well, great.
Do you know how many people are in Seoul? Do you know how big the city of Seoul is?
No, I have a question written down here.
38 million people.
You can't just ask your own question then answer.
38 million people, all tightly wound together.
Wait, I'm being told that's not even right. The actual number's a lot lower than that.
40.
I said lower.
38.
That's the same number you said before.
36,
No.
35,
No.
32.
No. Stop guessing.
31.
Okay, how about this? We'll do a real simple one. In what year is the film 1917 set?
I know the answer to that.
Wait, really?
I believe I do,
Would you like to tell us what it is?
but I cannot tell you that.
Jesus. Would you just want to give it a shot? What year is the film 1917 set?
1952 or something?
You know what? Sure, close enough. Good night.
During the COVID saga, all kinds of narratives have taken hold, even when the reality isn't quite so simple. And that's why you need another hand. We heard earlier in the show about Trump's heroic decision to implement a travel ban with China.
Everybody was against it. Almost everybody, I would say, was just absolutely against it.
But was everyone really against it? Australia passed a China travel ban the next day, and Israel and even Italy passed China travel bans on the same day as America. Even more relevant, America's 3 major airlines had just also suspended air services to China. So there wasn't a huge amount of air traffic left to ban anyway. Biden appears in a lot of Trump ads, calling the ban xenophobic, but his team says he wasn't even talking about the ban. Judge for yourself.
In moments like this is where the credibility of the president is most needed, as he explains what we should and should not do. This is no time for Donald Trump's record of hysterical xenophobia, and fear-mongering to lead the way instead of science.
And given that speech only occurred about 15 minutes after the travel ban was announced, he might be telling the truth. As for the ban itself, it allowed Americans, residents and their families to still fly from China. We're talking 40,000 people who have travelled direct from China since the ban was in place. Next. Andrew Cuomo. Everyone loves him. People give him a crisis gold medal. They praise his wisdom and they think they're in love with him. But on the other hand, even though San Francisco closed their schools on March 12 when they had 18 COVID cases, and Ohio closed their schools on the same day with 5 COVID cases, it took de Blasio and Cuomo 3 more days to close New York schools when they had 329 cases. And while San Francisco's stay-at-home order began on March 17 and California's began on March 19, New York's stay-at-home order didn't begin until 3 days later, when it may well have been too late. So old Cuomo might have been a bit slow-mo. We've spent a month arguing about chloroquine because of this trial.
A well-controlled, peer-reviewed study carried out by the most eminent infectious disease specialist in the world that showed a 100% cure rate against coronavirus. The study was recently accepted to the International Journal of Antimicrobial Agents.
But the people behind that journal just retracted the published trial because it doesn't meet their expected standards. Particularly concerning is that the trial's 100% success rate didn't include the 3 people who ended up in intensive care, or the person who died even though they were part of the treatment group. No mention of them in the top-line results at all. Next. Also on chloroquine, last week there was lots of talk about Trump having a small financial interest in Sanofi, the manufacturer of the brand name version of hydroxychloroquine. Some shows were very into it.
Sounds completely above board, an entire coincidence, and not at all corrupt either.
But that financial interest was small, all right. It turned out Trump had a maximum investment of $1,500 in that company, and possibly as little as $99. And chloroquine wasn't even a big deal to the company making it. They didn't list chloroquine in their financial accounts as one of their top 33 medications, and no wonder. It's available as a generic drug, so no one's making a lot of money out of it. And finally, this guy. If China really only had 35 new cases in its entire country yesterday, then why did it totally lock down Henan province? Actually, they didn't close down Henan province. They closed down a mid-sized county inside Henan province. You can tell by reading your own graphic, you idiot. But more importantly, that piece was only part of my obsession with citing precise death figures, even though death figures are definitely not precise. In New York, 200 people are dying at home every day, compared to about 20 people per day who died at home before the pandemic, and no one's testing those people for COVID-19. So how many of them are also COVID deaths? We don't know. And it works the other way as well.
Well, last Friday, I received a 7-page document that sort of told me that if I had an 86-year-old patient that had pneumonia but was never tested for COVID-19, but sometime after she came down with pneumonia, we learned that she had been exposed to her son who had no symptoms, but later on was identified with COVID-19, that it would be appropriate to diagnose on the death certificate COVID-19.
So are some places really counting deaths as COVID-19 without testing them for COVID-19? Yes, the New York City Health Department confirmed that they were going to do exactly that with some of those home deaths I mentioned before. So don't listen to this bozo. Those death numbers, they're kind of fuzzy. And John, I'm out of hands.
And I don't know who to believe anymore, Chaz, but that is it for another trip to Planet America. We will be back at the same time next Wednesday night.
But no fireside chat this Friday, although my podcast extra is available right there now.
Good night.